Welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Geri Simon, a League member and your host. Each program we talk about important public policy issues. We hope you'll discuss those same issues and that at election time you'll be ready and willing to go vote. This program we're going to talk about dealing with really all forms of hate, and to do that we have our guest from the Anti-Defamation League. She's Mary-Beth Muskin, who's the Regional Director of the Plain States region for the ADL. Welcome.
Thank you, Geri.
So let's start out with a little bit, so our viewers, maybe some viewers don't realize that we do have a regional office here in Omaha, and tell us a little bit of history about the Anti-Defamation League.
We're really lucky to have a regional office here in Omaha. The Anti-Defamation League is an organization that's over 105 years old, and the mission of it is was originally to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. All is in capital letters. The mission that was written 105 years ago is still the mission today. And I think it's a pretty important one given what's happening in our society and our communities right now.
I think if folks went to look at maybe even like the website or looked up the Anti-Defamation League, they would see fighting anti-Semitism. So would you explain that term to people?
So anti-Semitism is when you're looking at the defamation of the Jewish people, like long-held stereotypes or classifying a group of people in a negative manner. One of the reasons that Sigmund Livingston decided to embark on the development of the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, is because he came over from Europe, and in Europe there was a lot of anti-Semitism. There was a lot of classification of Jews into ghettos and stereotypes about Jews that were very negative, and he was surprised when he found some of those same feelings and sentiments held and expressed here in this country. And so he was an attorney in Chicago, and he felt very strongly that the defamation of the Jewish people needed to be addressed. Very quickly he realized that if we didn't like to be defamed, if we didn't like anti-Semitic slurs and props and behaviors, that nobody else would like to be dealt with in that manner either. So justice for all is in capital letters, because nobody within a protected or a different class, a class that isn't part of the majority, likes to feel defamed in any way.
So LGBTQ community, you're going to deal with any bias or hate toward that community?
Religions, religious, race, LGBTQ, mental health. Physical health.
And that's been since 1913, right?
1913, yeah.
A long time.
Long time.
This. Well, how long, we're the Plains region, Plain States region. How long have we had a regional office, or how long have you been in Nebraska?
We've been in Nebraska since 1950. So, and the regional office is Nebraska, Iowa, and Kansas, minus Kansas City, which floats over to St. Louis, the St. Louis office. There's 27 offices across the United States and one in Israel.
Okay. So tell our viewers a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved with the Anti-Defamation League?
So my background is actually in education, and when I retired from education, I was really looking at what I wanted to do next. And this is something that I'm passionate about. I've always worked with underserved populations. I did it as an educator as well. I'm passionate about education being a way to help people move forward. And the ADL has a toolbox that's quite extensive and offers a lot more tools to help support people in that way. Interestingly enough, the ADL is something that's pretty familiar to me, because in 1934, my grandfather started an ADL in Minnesota and Wisconsin. At that time, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. The governor of Minnesota was viewed as being very anti-Semitic, and some really horrible things were happening to Jews and Jewish businesses and Jewish communities. And so he brought that forward through the B'nai B'rith organization. And so for me, it's personal.
Okay, and you have other family members who are very much, besides having
my daughter is with the ADL office in Cleveland as an education consultant.
Okay, so it's a family commitment.
It is a family commitment, yes, and the other family members tire of it sometimes, but I think are happy to support us in our efforts.
Well, what goals do you have for the Plains Region office?
We're a very small office with a very large region, and there's a lot going on in the country right now. So we look at it, we break it into three parts. In terms of protect, we have a civil rights agenda and a civil rights committee. Through civil rights, we look at legislative initiatives. We look at get out the vote efforts. We've got a training coming up to deputize members of the Civil Rights Committee and anybody else who would like to attend it with us to help with the Get Out the Vote effort and to work with the League of Women Voters on accomplishing that. We work with DACA and Dreamers. We work with other general immigration issues because we came to the United States as refugees and immigrants as well. And so again, we feel like the immigration issues are very important to us. In terms of investigation, we are the largest reporters of anti-Semitic and other hate crimes to the FBI in the United States. Wow. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. So we were talking just before the show, and you asked how many incidents were across the region, and it was up 29% for our region alone. Wow. So, and we know that a lot of people don't report.
And that's almost a third increase.
Right,
wow.
And we over 2016. And we also know that those that report are coming from a place where they've been hurt, personally victimized and harmed. And so I feel that it's really important for us to not take that lightly and to find ways, where possible, to help that individual heal and move forward and to do things that are very mindful of that person. When we investigate something, or if I feel like this is something that we'd like to write a piece on to advocate for that individual, of course we would never do that without the permission of that and support of that individual. Depending on what it is, maybe there's some resources we can connect them to and some ways that we can help support them through the process if they're reporting it as a hate crime versus a hate incident. So there's all that. We also work with security in terms of security meetings and trainings for not just the Jewish community, but I've done walkthroughs in every mosque, I think almost every mosque in Omaha, and working with the Tri-Faith Initiative, working with churches on how to have a safe and secure place of worship. So that all comes under investigation. And then, of course, education, which is my passion, and something I've been involved in for so many years. And for me, when I look at education, I look at how we can connect one piece with another piece. So we have a school program called No Place for Hate, the No Place for Hate initiative. We do a training in the fall for high school and the winter for middle school, and we haven't added a training yet for elementary, but we're looking at it, which is a full-day anti-bias training. We take 10 kids from each participating school, and we spend a full day talking about bias and talking about how to become an ally. And the last session of that day is to talk about how we can make change within our own school. And the kids know what needs changing in their own school a lot better than we do. So the initiative really has the students working as leaders through the support of staff, counselors, and teachers to put together a program for their own school. And that's a K-12 initiative. We do community outreach and community education. We do things like wine and conversation, where we've got one coming up on payday lending, March 15th, Thursday, March 15th. We've done legislative initiatives. We've done, just whatever is current. We have an educator speaker series where we specifically focus on issues that teachers may be dealing with in their classroom and may need a little bit of extra support on. We have a repository of just fabulous curriculum, lesson plans and ideas that teachers can take for free and use within their classroom to deal with difficult issues or issues that they may not, that they may need a little extra support with.
So if a teacher through their school district, obviously you're doing programs the school districts are well aware, but if a particular teacher wanted a program, they could contact you.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. So right after this most recent presidential election, within 5 days, our curriculum department had a lesson plan out on how to bring the family back together again, because what we found was that often families found themselves on opposite sides of the political divide.
Right.
And because it's become such a divide, we had to find ways to help families reconnect with each other and get, work through that and have it not be divisive within a family.
Okay. I know you mentioned working with other groups, and I wanted to ask you more about that, the Tri-Faith Initiative and the center coming up. And then I think a lot of people, when they think about fighting bias and civil rights issues, they think of the ACLU, and that was formed actually later than the ADL in 1920, so 7 years later. But you work with the ACLU as well,
Yes,
partner
we
with
do.
them. So talk a little bit about that.
So we would never do personal litigation,
Okay.
but we would file an amicus brief in cases.
Okay.
So, for example, there was a case in our region where a mosque wanted to expand. They bought the whole building, so they were working in part of a building. They wanted the whole building. And they bought the building. Well, then it was a small town, and the city fathers put in a number of ordinances requiring them to do special things before they would be allowed to use that building. And one of the ones that comes to mind was that they were, in this very small town, required to have 120 parking places for their mosque, which there probably weren't 120 parking places in the entire downtown area. So ADL, through our national office and through their expertise, we filed an amicus brief in that case. And now the mosque is running in the entire building. So.
Okay. That's wonderful.
Things like we do things like that. We were one of the first ones to file on Brown versus Board of Education, and we have a very active civil rights agenda in terms of amicus briefs, and we usually look to filing with a number of other organizations, because I think that the strength comes in the numbers.
Right.
So.
Well, I wanted you to talk a little bit more about when you talked about the ever-growing divide politically, and I think recently the ADL did a survey, or audit actually, of incidents of anti-Semitic incidents, hate incidents, and you found that they really surged to 60% in 2017.
Yeah,
over
67% between 2016 and 2017, and the largest increase was K-12. In our schools and in our universities, and
Wow.
that, of course, is rather frightening. But it's also borne out in our office, the calls that we're getting from parents and teachers and schools, and to help rabbis. How do I deal with this? Can you help me? Sort of navigate through some of this. Swastikas in bathrooms with hateful sayings on them, and what we're seeing in terms of rise in anti-Semitism, I'm also seeing in rise in anti-Muslim, in Black, in Latino, in LGBTQ, across the board. We have the numbers already, collated for anti-Semitism, but unfortunately, I'm seeing it with every group that we're working with, and that's very concerning.
It is concerning, and also I think the audit said this surge in incidents is the biggest since 1979, and also in 1 year.
In 1 year.
And then the other piece of it that was striking was that, of course, it's not happening just in high Jewish population areas, typically like the East Coast, somewhere like that, maybe Florida. But every state in the union had at least an incident. So what kinds of, is it hate crimes? Is it was school in the Plains region? Are you seeing a particular kind of incident here?
So we see both hate crimes and hate incidents.
Okay.
And, I think it's nice for people to know that if they have a hate incident, it might not rise to the level of being reported to the police because it isn't a crime. but it doesn't make it any less hurtful.
Explain that for people.
So for a hate crime to happen, it has to be a crime first. So it's something that you would be reporting to the police, and then they would realize that the reason this crime happened was specifically because of race, religion, sexual orientation, whatever.
Okay.
So, and when that happens, and it rises to that level, then that crime can be classified as a hate crime. And then there are additional punitive things that happen because of that. But more often what we see are hate incidents, something that doesn't rise to the level of the crime, but are still pretty egregious. And if they go unreported or undocumented, undiscussed, then typically what happens is they increase. As we know, a lot of times with bullying or hate incidents, it might start as something small and then it grows. And when it grows, it can then become, if unchecked, a crime. So obviously, we would want to stop things in the incident
Right. So
range.
So like you mentioned bullying, we're also talking about things like maybe someone being harassed, a group of people harassed at a bus stop, anything like that.
Right.
Where it's
So
not necessarily...
assaults, harassment, yeah.
Okay. So when you said that you find out about the incidents here in Nebraska, how do you typically find out about what has happened or encourage people to come to you and report? And then how do you investigate?
It's so funny. So, you know, oftentimes I'll just be like walking through a grocery store and someone will go, "Oh, I knew I wanted to call you. You can't believe what happened the other day." And then something follows. Or,
Okay.
"I told them to call you. Did they call you yet?" Nope, they didn't. So a lot of times it's almost even coincidentally. Sometimes it's because of a news report. Sometimes, and I'll follow up on it, and I'll reach out to that individual,
Okay.
and I'll say, "I hear that this happened." Sometimes we do a lot of work with law enforcement, and we're moving even more strongly into anti-bias training for law enforcement.
Okay.
Sometimes it will be some of our law enforcement partners that might call the FBI or the OPD or, you know, any of the other regions, police, law enforcement people that we're working with, Homeland Security. They'll call and say, "You know, this happened, it didn't feel right. Is this something you might want to check into more closely?" Or, obviously, the most reliable is the individual that it happens to reporting it.
Okay.
And it can happen in the workplace, it can happen in the mall, it can happen in a bar, it can happen obviously in schools, way too much in schools. So, and it falls into three categories: vandalism, harassment, and assault. Fortunately, assault is the lowest number, but vandalism and harassment
Spray
are
painting
really,
and other
right, like
nasty
spray
things,
painting a message, you know, coming home and
Okay.
having the halls of an apartment building spray painted with vile, hurtful, hateful things, and 98% of the people living in that building are a minority, those kinds of things.
Frightening.
Very
So-
frightening. Very frightening because you've now defaced my home. How do I feel comfortable walking back into my home?
Right. Well, you mentioned schools, and you touched on the elementary and middle school and high school, but let's talk about colleges a little bit. We're seeing probably an uptick in concern about free speech, hate speech versus free speech. We recently had a pretty famous, probably, I guess you'd call him a white nationalist, speaking at Creighton University.
Yep.
And then we had a student who was at UNL, who there were demonstrations about him being on campus because he's been so outspoken with his white nationalism message. Talk about that. When Richard Spencer, he came to Creighton, when he
Right.
went to Michigan State, there were fistfights that broke out, not here. But how do we deal with that free speech versus hate speech?
So, you know, we're not going to like everything everybody says.
Right.
And we are proponents of free speech as an organization. I personally, and as an organization as well. And so, you know, I think that what we look for is, did that speech cross the line? And when it crosses the line, then it becomes a crime. So, you know, I think that we have Richard Spencer and Mr. Cleve in Lincoln, they're very good at walking that line.
Okay.
And at least yet haven't fallen over.
So the answer,
So the answer is, that
more speech to combat the hateful speech.
But the bottom line is that everybody has free speech, right?
Exactly.
So if they have the opportunity for free speech, then I too have the opportunity for free speech.
Right.
And I can go make sure that my speech becomes the item of discussion
Right.
instead of what's happening over here. And I think that, our white nationalists really have taken center stage because we've allowed them to. And it's on us to change that dialogue and to make sure that if this is happening over here, then we're doing something else over here. And that we're not giving it the airtime that is so desired by the white supremacist or the white nationalists or the vanguard or whatever.
Okay.
So,
Well, it's colleges again. There's a new ADL initiative, and on 20 campuses across the country, we are very. It's surprising. UNO is one of those institutions. So talk about that initiative.
it's exciting. It's an initiative. They had to apply to become that, and what we're looking for is for students to take a look at some of those hate messages and some of the white supremacist blogs and dialogue and relate it to what's happening on their campus, and then look at how to make a change in that. And so through media, through public service announcements, through understanding social media, how do we change those messages? And I think it's an innovation. It's an innovation grant, and UNO got one of those grants, and we're excited to see where their dialogue leads them. And we're also excited to see college students as well as younger join the conversation on this, because they're the ones that are savvy in terms of social media, and we know that social media has become such an easy way to spread a message.
Right.
If we're going to spread the negative messages, we need to learn how to spread the positive ones, and again, change the dialogue.
Okay. And ADL is also doing something with trying to, when you mentioned social media, there's using artificial intelligence to try to determine what speech. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think
We have another new initiative. We have, ADL has a Center on Extremism, which tracks extremism. We also have a center on technology and society, and it is through that center and a joint initiative with Berkeley that they're working towards looking at online and figuring out where these messages are coming from and how to better deal with it, and how to grapple with the freedom of speech versus the hate messages, and again, where does that cross the line?
And they're going to try to actually pinpoint or determine what speech is hateful versus what isn't.
Versus what isn't, right,
So,
right.
A big project then.
I think that for so many years, our computers have just, like, if we put blocks on them, you put kind of a general block on a computer because you don't want negative things on computers at schools. Well, then you might also be blocked from juvenile detention. Like, so if you have a student doing research on juvenile detention, they can't get into it because it's blocked. So I think this will give us a better idea of, how to block the right messages versus general information.
Okay. Well, if our viewers see something, hear something about something that they think is maybe an incident that's up, something that the ADL would want to know about, what should they do?
I think I love that you asked that question because, we all know when something isn't right. And when something isn't right, if you see something, you need to say something. And you need to think about that ahead of time. And that's part of what we train our students to do, is how to become an ally to someone. We all know that if you don't say anything and you watch something happen, you're as guilty as the perpetrator, because you, through doing nothing, acknowledge that it was okay that happened. So, we don't want, You know, we're not advocating vigilante justice here,
No.
but if you see something, you need to say something, and you can do that by calling the ADL, by calling the police if it's a crime,
Okay.
by saying something if there's a stereotype that is just sort of thrown out there and sitting in the air about saying, wow, you know, I don't really believe that, or I don't think that's right. If it's a student that isn't comfortable with saying something, knowing who the trusted adults are that they can say something to is really important. And I think it's just going to be on all of us to turn things around and to bring our country back and focused in terms of civility.
Okay.
I think
So
that,
set aside any fear, any complacency, and do something.
and do something,
Okay.
right?
We just have a couple minutes left, but do you want to talk about any activities that you have or programs that you've got coming up?
Well, I would
soon?
just say we've got a lot of stuff coming
Yes.
up. So go on our webpage, like us on Facebook, follow our tweets. We're the ADL CRC Plains State Region. CRC is the Jewish Federation, which also supports our office. We're
Okay.
very lucky to have all that support, and yeah, become involved.
Okay. And talk a little bit, you're a League of Women Voters member. And,
Yes, I am.
So you're interested, the ADL's interested in voting rights. So talk about, you have an upcoming deputy registrar
Yes,
training?
yes.
Okay.
On March 19th, which is a Monday, we will have a training. You're more than welcome to join us. Call our office and register.
And it will be at?
It will be
where?
at the Jewish Community Center, but we'd like you to call and register. So we'll give you all the information on
Okay.
it if you just call our office.
And the JCC is?
Or email, Jewish Community Center.
At, where-
132nd.
Right, so people know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to add real quickly?
I think we're looking forward to collaborating with League of Women Voters on
Yes.
Get Out the Vote. We look
Yeah.
at voting rights in terms of legislation, in terms of helping get out the vote, and we're really excited about some of the new initiatives we have going
That's
to
great.
that end.
To collaborate and also let our viewers know what the ADL is doing, because you are doing so much in this community. And we want to be sure people know about it.
Thank
And
you so much.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
for
having
being
me.
here. Thanks, Mary-Beth. For the League of Women Voters, I'm Geri Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues, and at election time, go vote, Omaha.